Kate, and the title of my project is Spice Up Your Life because I plan on examining the food habit adding spices and herbs to your food. I couldn't do this presentation without actually starting my project because I've already tried looking at the connections of spices to other ideas and other topics. The first thing I'm going to start with is my own story and how I grew up hating the food that my mom cooked. But as I've gotten older and started cooking for myself, I realized that it's not necessarily the food my mom has cooked, but the spices she adds to her food. She uses a lot of Cajun spices, but also things like mushroom sauces and garlic sauces and garlic powder. And this started making me think of why my mom cooks the way she cooks. It's because my grandma cooks in a certain way, and my grandma cooks in a certain way because of where she comes from. Well, this brought me to the idea of how regions affect food and the people of a certain area. Obviously, different regions are different areas for spices to grow, and they can affect and leave lasting impressions on both the food and the people. I will also show how a region can affect the superstitions that people create around spices. Superstitions are a really interesting way to look at both the spices of a region and the people of a region. There are so many superstitions connected to spices, and I have found in my research that different regions have different either variations or completely different versions of superstitions regarding spices. Also, different regions have different ideas of what health benefits come from spices. Some of these health benefits, some of them are real and some of them are made up. I find the made up ones to be more interesting because how do these ideas form, and why are people interested in the health benefits, and why do different regions have different variations or completely different ideas of the health benefits of these spices. The way an idea forms is also kind of interesting to me because it led me to the idea of thinking of authenticity. In my reading about spices, I found that many people view fresh spices and fresh herbs to be the more authentic version of spices. It is what cooks generally recommend using, or it's in a lot of my recipes I have. But dried spices are pretty good versions of the spices as well. They were once fresh spices, and what makes fresh more authentic than a dried version? Dried versions tend to be just more concentrated amounts of the spices, and they last longer, and plus they actually have more flavor in them. You need to use less of the dried because they have so much more flavor. So how did the fresh ones become the more authentic ones? Because in my own cooking, I prefer to use dried spices. I also plan on tackling the idea of pleasure or sensual aspects of spices. Spice up your life is a saying for a reason. It's about adding more of the good or adding more of the exciting things to your life, just as spices add more flavor and exciting things to your food. I found several short stories and different ideas of people associating spices with pleasure. A specific short story that interests me right now is how this girl dates different guys because she's associating their spices with certain pleasure, and she comes from a bland home where her mom only cooks with bland food. So all these exotic spices and this exotic idea of spices and exotic pleasure is all tied up in with the idea of these men using spices in their food, which I think is a really interesting idea. Also, speaking of associating pleasure with life, we could talk about the Spice Girls. There's a reason they chose the name Spice Girls and the word spices. Spice, the word, has a meaning outside of just different parts of plants. They chose to become different spices, such as sporty spice and stuff. Why would they choose this word? What makes it a special or appealing to culture? Hopefully I'll be successful unpacking some of these word associations, like the words associations and spice, and figuring all that out. I also hoped to connect many of ideas back to the idea of the spice trade in general. For instance, the word spices spice became associated with currency in Venice and Italy, and Venice specifically, but Italy and Europe, and spices were like a very valuable commodity. But other ideas I have connect directly back with the spice trade, and how ideas and superstitions and these ideas I've been talking about traveled along with spices to different regions and either got changed or altered or flipped in interesting ways. Um, in the end, like, this will land me right back into my own kitchen, I hope, because I plan on talking about how the ideas of spices and the background of spices affects, and how where I come from, where my family comes from, the region, how this all affects the way we cook using spices in our own kitchens and every day, like our spice racks and what spices we use and what kinds of food we cook. And there's a reason Italian food is associated with basil and oregano and all those sorts of things. And that is a little insight into my final project. Thank you.